I bought the mountain house on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the air smells like pine and old rain, and the silence feels earned. The listing had been up for months. Abandoned, they said. No utilities for years. No road maintenance. No neighbors willing to claim they knew who owned it last. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Places like that don't stay empty because they're worthless. They stay empty because someone made them inconvenient. The house sat halfway up a ridge, tucked behind overgrown fir trees, with a narrow gravel road that looked like it hadn't seen a plow since the last decade. The structure itself was solid. Stone foundation. Heavy timber beams. Weathered, but honest. The kind of house that doesn't ask permission to exist. I closed the deal clean. Title search. Survey. County records. Every box checked. I owned it. On paper and in reality. The first night I stayed there, I slept better than I had in years. No traffic. No sirens. Just wind brushing the siding and the low creak of an old house settling into someone caring about it again. I woke up early, stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee, and that's when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the gravel drive, arms crossed, sunglasses already on despite the early hour. Perfectly pressed jacket. Clipboard tucked under one arm. She didn't wave. She didn't introduce herself. She just stared at the house like it had personally offended her. By noon, she was knocking. "I'm with the HOA," she said before I could speak. Not hello. Not good morning. Straight to authority. "This property has been unmanaged for years." "I bought it," I replied calmly. Her smile tightened. "No, you didn't." That was the first red flag. Not disbelief. Ownership denial. She flipped her clipboard around, pointing at a map that looked like it had been printed sometime before smartphones existed. "This house falls under our jurisdiction. Abandoned properties revert to HOA oversight." "That's not how ownership works," I said. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "It's mine now." That's what happens when people stop caring. The sentence landed heavier than it should have. Not because it made sense, because she believed it. I told her she was mistaken, that I had the deed, that the county approved the transfer, that she was trespassing. She wrote something down, nodded curtly, and left without another word. An hour later, the first police car came up the road. The officer was polite, almost embarrassed. "Welfare check," he said. "Complaint about illegal occupation of an abandoned structure." I showed him the paperwork. He apologized and left. The next day it happened again. Different officer. Same explanation. Same paperwork. Same outcome. By the fourth day, the routine was predictable. Morning knock. Afternoon cruiser. Evening silence. Each time, the report said no issue found. Each time, the call came from the same number. I tried to contact the HOA directly. No response. Emails went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. But she showed up every morning like clockwork, standing just far enough off the porch to claim she wasn't on my property, staring at the house like it was slipping through her fingers. On the fifth day, as another cruiser turned around in my driveway, I realized something important. This wasn't about confusion. It wasn't about rules. It was about possession. She wasn't enforcing policy. She was trying to exhaust me. And she had no intention of stopping. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every morning, just after sunrise, her car appeared at the bend in the gravel road. Same silver SUV. Same slow crawl. She never parked in the same spot twice, like she was testing invisible boundaries. Some days she stood near the tree-line, pretending to take notes. Other days she leaned against her hood, phone pressed to her ear, eyes fixed on the house. By the end of the first week, the police knew me by name. Not in a hostile way. In a tired procedural way. One officer finally admitted, off the record, that the calls were flagged but still had to be answered. "She's persistent," he said, glancing back down the road. "Claims she's protecting community assets. There was no community up here. No shared mailbox. No common land. Just scattered cabins miles apart, most of them older than the HOA itself." I pulled county maps, zoning overlays, historic plats. The house sat on its own parcel, carved out long before anyone thought to organize mountain silence into bylaws. Still, the harassment continued. She began leaving notices. Slipped under the door. Taped to the porch rail. Brightly colored warnings about unauthorized occupancy and pending enforcement actions. None of them cited statutes. None of them had official seals. They were intimidation dressed up as administration. One afternoon, she crossed the line. Literally. I was repairing a broken fence post when she marched up the drive, heels crunching on gravel, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "You need to vacate immediately," she said. "This property is under dispute." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I asked her to leave. She laughed. "I'll call the police." Again. "Please do," I replied. She did it right there. In front of me. Loudly. Describing the house as abandoned. Me as a squatter. Herself as the rightful authority. The officer who arrived recognized us both. He listened. He reviewed the deed. Then he did something new. He asked her to step aside. The conversation happened quietly, but I saw her posture change. Shoulders stiff.
Smile gone.
When she returned, she didn't look at me. She snapped her clipboard shut and left without another word. That night, I installed cameras. Not hidden ones. Visible.
Clearly marked.
Covering the drive, the porch, the perimeter. If she wanted to create a record, I'd make sure it was accurate. The next morning, she noticed immediately. She stood in front of the lens, sunglasses off, staring directly into it. Then she held up a folder and tapped it twice, like a warning. The police came twice that day. On the second visit, I asked for a supervisor. I laid everything out. The repeated calls. The false claims. The trespassing. The threats. I handed over copies of the notices she'd left behind. The footage. The timestamps. The body cam recordings from prior visits. The supervisor listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he nodded once and said something I'd been waiting to hear. "This is harassment." He advised me to document everything and file a formal complaint. He also suggested a restraining order if the behavior continued. "She's using us as a tool," he said. "And that's not okay." Word travels fast in small jurisdictions. By the next day, the calls stopped. Not because she'd given up. Because she was adjusting. I knew that look. The quiet retreat. The planning phase. People like her don't disappear when they lose. They wait. They escalate sideways. And whatever she was preparing next, it wasn't going to involve clipboards and morning visits. It was going to be louder. The silence lasted 3 days. No SUV. No notices. No police. The mountain settled back into its old rhythm, and for the first time since moving in, I let myself believe she'd finally understood that persistence cuts both ways. I focused on repairs, hauled supplies up the road, and started clearing the brush that had crept too close to the house. On the 4th morning, the calls started again, but this time they weren't about me. They were about safety, environmental concerns, suspicious activity near a watershed. She had changed the script. A county inspector arrived first. He wore a hard hat and carried a tablet, apologizing before I even asked why he was there. "We received a report about unauthorized dumping," he said. I walked him around the property. No barrels. No stains. No runoff. He took photos, thanked me, and left. An hour later, another vehicle climbed the road. Different department. Different uniform. Fire safety. Someone had reported illegal camping structures and open flames. I showed them the empty fire ring, cold and unused. They shrugged, filled out a form, and left. By sunset, I understood her strategy. If she couldn't scare me out, she'd bury me in process. Each visit created a record. Each record created the illusion of a problem. Enough paperwork, and even a clean property starts to look questionable. That night, I received an email from the HOA's attorney.
Short. Vague.
Requesting temporary access to assess potential risks associated with prolonged abandonment. The word abandonment appeared twice, like a charm they hoped would work if repeated. I replied with copies of the deed, the surveys, the county approvals, and a single sentence: no access without a court order. The next day, the police returned, but this time they weren't responding to a call. They came to talk. The supervisor explained that the volume of complaints had triggered an internal review. Not of me, of the caller. They asked for everything: footage, emails, notices. I handed it over.
Calmly. Completely.
When they left, I saw the last thing she wanted me to see: uncertainty. 2 days later, I got the letter. A formal notice from the HOA declaring the property in dispute and asserting temporary custodial rights, pending review. It was nonsense, but it was printed on letterhead, signed and dated, designed to intimidate lenders, insurers, and anyone else who might ask questions. That was the moment I stopped reacting and started preparing. I pulled the full HOA charter. Every amendment. Every annexation map. I found the boundary lines, the exclusions, the footnotes everyone ignores. The mountain parcel wasn't just outside their control. It was specifically exempted, recorded decades earlier after a similar dispute. I sent the documentation to the county, the sheriff's office, and the HOA attorney. Certified. Tracked. Impossible to claim ignorance. The response was immediate and quiet. No reply. No acknowledgement. Just another visit. This time it was her. Not in the morning. Not at the drive. She came in the afternoon and walked straight onto the porch. She knocked once, hard, like she owned the door. When I didn't answer, she leaned in close and said it, loud enough for the cameras to hear: "This won't end the way you think it will." She turned and left, confident, satisfied, certain she'd made herself clear. She had. Because threats mean you've run out of policy. And when people abandon the rules they pretend to enforce, they expose themselves. Whatever came next wouldn't be paperwork. It would be personal. And I knew the mountain would witness everything, leaving no room for denials later. The escalation came at night. Not late evening. Not dusk. Deep night, when the mountain road goes black and sound carries farther than it should. I was inside, lights low, reviewing documents at the kitchen table, when headlights swept across the trees in a slow, deliberate arc. Not a passing car. Someone stopping. I checked the cameras. Her SUV rolled into the turnout near the gate, engines still running. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. Finally, she stepped out. She didn't have the clipboard this time. No blazer. No official posture. Just a jacket, phone in hand, and that same certainty she'd worn since day one. She walked past the posted property line sign without hesitation and headed straight toward the house. I didn't open the door. She knocked.
Once.
Then harder. Then she started talking, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. She claimed emergency authority. Claimed complaints. Claimed immediate access rights. She even claimed the police were on their way, as if saying it might make it true. I stayed silent. That's when she tried the handle. It didn't budge. She tried again, more force this time, rattling the frame. Her voice sharpened. She demanded I open up. Claimed obstruction. Claimed she had the right to enter and secure the premises. Then she made her mistake. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I could hear her through the door and the camera audio, describing an unresponsive occupant in a dangerous, abandoned structure, refusing access to authorities. She exaggerated. She embellished. She used all the words she'd practiced. I called 911 too, calmly,
Clearly.
I reported an individual trespassing on my property, attempting forced entry, falsely claiming authority, and refusing to leave when instructed. I mentioned prior harassment, ongoing documentation, active cameras. The difference between our calls was tone. Hers was urgency, without truth. Mine was detail, without emotion. When the sirens came, they weren't subtle. 2 cruisers. Then a third. Lights painting the trees red and blue. She stepped back from the porch, suddenly small, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. The officers separated us immediately. 1 stayed with me inside. 2 took her aside. I handed over everything. Footage from the porch. Prior reports. The letter. The boundary maps. The exemption clause. The timestamps showing repeated visits. The officer inside didn't interrupt.
He didn't need to.
Outside, voices rose. Then fell. Then rose again. She argued. Insisted. Claimed misunderstanding. Claimed she was just doing her job. The phrase sounded weaker each time she said it. When they came back, the tone had changed. She was cited for trespassing. Officially.
Documented.
The officer explained, clearly and slowly, that any further contact with my property would result in arrest. Not warnings. Not discussions.
Arrest.
She stared at me like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Like I'd cheated. Like consequences were something that happened to other people. As they escorted her away, she said nothing. No threats. No speeches. Just a tight jaw and eyes fixed forward. The mountain went quiet again after the cruisers left. The kind of quiet that settles heavy, like it's watching, remembering. I slept that night.
Deeply.
Because escalation only works when the other side panics. And I hadn't. What she brought to my door wasn't authority. It was entitlement stripped of witnesses. And the moment witnesses arrived, it collapsed. I knew it wasn't over. People like her don't stop because they're wrong. They stop because they're exposed. And exposure, unlike fear, doesn't fade in the dark. The fallout didn't happen loudly. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic announcements, no victory laps. It unfolded the way real consequences usually do. Quietly, through paperwork, phone calls, and decisions made behind closed doors. 2 days after the trespassing citation, the police supervisor returned alone. No lights. No uniform drama. He sat at the kitchen table and explained that the pattern of calls, false reports, and documented intimidation had triggered a formal review. Not of the property. Of her. The HOA's attorney emailed that same afternoon. The tone was different now. Careful. Measured. He acknowledged receipt of my documentation and confirmed, in writing, that the mountain parcel was outside HOA jurisdiction. He added a sentence that mattered more than the rest. Any further contact from HOA representatives would be considered unauthorized. She never came back. A week later, the police stopped coming too. The daily ritual she'd built collapsed the moment it stopped working. Without law enforcement as leverage, she had nothing left to apply pressure with. No keys. No policies. No authority. Word spread faster than I expected. Neighbors I'd never met before began stopping by during daylight hours. Some apologized. Some warned me she'd tried similar tactics before, always just short of consequences. Always counting on exhaustion and silence. No one had ever pushed back long enough to make a record. The HOA board met behind closed doors. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. The result arrived in my mailbox as a single-page notice, a leadership change effective immediately. No explanation. No names. Just confirmation that procedural overreach had been addressed. Power hates documentation. It thrives in ambiguity, not timestamps. I kept improving the house. Utilities restored. Roof reinforced. Road graded. What had been labeled abandoned started to look unmistakably occupied. Legitimate. Unmovable. The mountain didn't resist the change. It welcomed it. One afternoon, months later, I found one of her old notices folded into a crack near the porch beam. Sun-faded. Irrelevant. I didn't throw it away. I tucked it into a folder with the rest of the evidence. Not out of spite. Out of respect for the lesson. Entitlement depends on people believing they're alone. The HOA never contacted me again. No letters. No fines. No courtesy inspections. The exemption clause I'd uncovered was added to a public map on the county site, highlighted for anyone who bothered to check. What had once been hidden in footnotes became impossible to ignore. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit on the porch and listen to the wind move through the trees. I think about how close I came to giving up in those early days. How easy it would have been to leave, sell, walk away, and let the mountain remain inconvenient. That's what she'd counted on. People like her don't want ownership. They want surrender. They want the satisfaction of watching resistance dissolve quietly, so they never have to explain themselves. I didn't confront her. I didn't threaten her. I didn't outmatch her volume. I outlasted her narrative. The house isn't special because it's remote or old or isolated. It's special because it proved something simple and durable. Authority without jurisdiction is just noise. Repeated often enough, it sounds convincing. Documented properly, it sounds desperate. The mountain still stands where it always has, indifferent to titles and clipboards and false claims. It only responds to effort and time. And every time I lock the door at night, I do it knowing exactly who has the right to be there.
Just me.
And the quiet.